I let the language come through, the tongue speak flows through, there's a channeling and connection where messages are received. And there have been times where other entities have been present, like Mary, Mother Mary, Jesus. It's a feeling, it's a sense of these old, powerful entities and energies. Hi, I'm Dr. Siri K. Zemel, and this is Your Superior Self.
Oh, perfection. That was amazing. Dr. Siri, I don't want to say that too loud because I think my phone might start
It does.
answering me.
That happens to me every day.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm just so fabulous and delighted to be here. How are you?
I'm so fabulous too. I just got done reading your book. And man, I just had to say something. Like, you truly opened yourself up in that book.
Mm.
Like, was there any hesitation in publishing that?
Oh gosh, lots.
What was your number one fear?
Losing my job, my credibility.
Really? You thought there's a possibility you could have lost your job?
No, but that was my fear. Fear is the ultimate illusion, right? But of course, my mind went there. I don't think I, would have been fired for it directly, but credibility is a psychological attachment, respect, in leadership and management, and feeling a sense of connectedness with people in the workplace. And I was afraid that I put myself out there, I would really lose that connectedness, that relatability, and that professional respect.
Okay, cool.
That's the biggest fear.
Yeah, I think we all have that fear, especially when it involves going public with certain things, right? And your thing is tongue speaking and or channeling, which
Mhm.
I love. I'm used to channeling. However, when I was younger, I did hear about people speaking in tongues and wasn't really too familiar with that, never really exposed to that. However, starting the show, and to your point about having fear about what other people think about you, it's funny how my channel evolved into the metaphysical. I never would have thought that I would be doing these type of subjects. However, here I am with you, right? And I love every second of it because it's helping me evolve as a spiritual being and as a person, as a self. And why don't we give some context about your story, right? Like, Dr. Siri, how is she, or how did she become a channeler or a speaker of tongues?
Sure. So it's always been innate within me. So since I was a little kid, I had this weird, crazy language that rolled through me that nobody else spoke. And I'll preface that by saying I was never raised in a family that spoke in tongues. I've never been to a charismatic Christian church where that's the norm. Still to this day, I never have participated or met anyone else, who has done that or witnessed anyone else who has done that. I know that there's lots of folks out there. And I look forward to building a community of folks with this gift, but it's sort of outside of religion. So I'll say that I didn't learn it. It was just something innate that flowed through me. I remember being a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, and having all these imaginary friends and just communicating in this other language. And it felt very normal and natural to me. I think once I realized all my friends and family didn't do it, I kind of shut it down. And it became dormant for most of, my childhood and young adult life. It would kind of come out in the middle of the night, or if I became startled, or, kind of when I'm at my real core self, it just stumbled out of me. But then once I got into meditation in college and became, very, very proficient meditator, practicer, it intensified the language. It sort of came out more. And I would just kind of sing or talk or connect with spirit with this language flowing through me in not hiding like I was trying to hide, but I would just do it kind of when I was alone, hanging out, sweeping, driving around, doing whatever. And it brought me just great peace. When the words flow through me, sort of my heart song flows through me, I felt a sense of connection and almost even euphoria and contentment. It wasn't until much later that I realized that the tongue speak was connected with channeling. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even really question what it was. It just was, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and I became curious about it later in life.
Sure. I'm so curious about it right now. So what type of do you know what language it is when it comes out of you?
I don't. So I had done a training once with Brian Weiss. He's a psychiatrist who trains in past life regression therapy. I did 3 trainings with him actually. And in one of the smaller trainings with him, this was at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, and had the opportunity to connect with him, more at a personal level, and shared it with him. Actually, it came out when we were doing our practice sessions with one another. And he said, yeah, it doesn't sound like a major world language. Don't recognize it as a major, but keep exploring it, because there's all kinds of fantastic mystical experiences that include connection with the other side, angels, spirit guides, etc. So just trust it and kind of let it flow through you. I've had others say it's a form of, angel speak or connecting with the angelic dimension. I don't know. I have not gone to a linguist. That sounds fun.
You
Um,
should do that. What if it's
yeah,
like an ancient civilization, like ancient, like old lexicon, like semantics, like it's just something out otherworldly than this, right? Like that would be so fascinating.
right. So all kinds of questions are, okay, is this a past life that my soul carried over this language into this life that I'm, communicating using an older language? Am I somehow channeling a being either from the past or from another part of the world that is speaking through me, right?
Hmm.
Is it just gibberish from my brain, where my brain is kind of hardwired to have this connection with the spiritual dimension, but it doesn't come out in this cognitive English language, right? What is it? I don't know. I decided kind of along my journey at some point to cease understanding, and exploring, because I was afraid of losing the sacredness of it, right? So when I ended up getting my doctorate, I had the thought, oh, I'm going to study this. This is really fascinating. And I want to study it and understand it and write my dissertation on this. And ultimately, I decided not to do that because I just didn't want to kill it. I didn't want to squash it. I didn't want to rake it over the coals of academia and feel like I had to defend it. Because when I connect with the language and when I allow the messages to move through me, it provides such peace and such clarity and such profound guidance in my life. I mean, that is just far, far too precious to try and fit it into a box or analyze it to write into paper. Maybe one day I'll get there. I'm still young in my journey, right? So maybe one day I'll get there and be able to integrate those worlds of academically understanding it and being able to harvest the incredibly profound and beautiful support that it offers my life.
Sure. Do you know when you channel, do you know who you're channeling? Is it your guides? Is it other people's guides?
Right. So what I have been told in that state, in that meditative state, is that it is my guides, my spirit guides. And it is sort of this council, right? So it's a we, it's an us, it's a, guides plural. Um, when I go to that space though, so here's kind of how it happens for me. I always begin with a prayer, for protection, for guidance, to kind of get myself out of the way, to make sure that, hey, I'm opening myself up to this spiritual dimension. I want to make sure that it's, safe. So I offer a prayer. I let the language tumbles out for a little bit, and then the messages start to interpret what is being said. Once I get into that really deep state, and I would say deep hypnotic state, but there's a pretty small induction phase, right? I mean, it's just that deep meditative state of connectivity. When I get there, often other things will happen. So from that space, there have been departed souls that will communicate from that space. Not always. I don't ask for that. But often if I'm sharing this work with others, they might ask, oh, hey, I really want to connect with so-and-so who's passed. When I'm in that state, often it turns into a mediumistic communication as well.
How do you
So
recognize how do you recognize that it is, I guess, your spirit guides and then and or departed souls or loved ones?
that's an excellent question. How would I articulate that? It just feels different.
Sure.
Um,
So like what is the energy like, how
mhm,
different is that?
mhm. Um, so when I'm channeling my spirit guides or the messages, it's in me, but coming through me at the same time, right? It's not outside of me. It's sort of like it's sort of like my physical being is the channel, the portal, right? Like they spent a lot of time early when I was first uncovering this work, talking about the portal of the heart and the sort of doorway of the heart center, kind of in the center of my chest. And that sort of, it feels like it emerges from somehow within. But when I say it emerges from within, it's not coming from my mind. It's not coming from my like cognition or imagination. It's coming from deeper inside, but through me, right? When I feel the presence of a departed soul, it's outside of me.
Mm,
It's sort of like over to the right or to the left or above or behind. It's not like coming through me, if that makes sense.
maybe.
I
I mean,
don't think I've ever tried to explain it before. So
yeah, right. I mean, I get that. I can see that. Have you ever, when you're doing the mediumship part of that, have you ever received any type of training in that? I know that I think there's a school in England or something like that specializes in that. Have you received any of that training before?
So I have not, but I'll tell you a little bit about that part of my journey. So I don't do it professionally. I don't do it publicly, only for, friends and family who ask, and not even that much. When I first had my big coming out, which is when I wrote the book, which is during COVID, and I thought, what the hell, we're all going to die anyway. I just want to live my authentic self for 5 minutes before the world ends, right? So that's really kind of why I wrote the book, was just to come to terms with myself. It was really just my own coming out and self-acceptance, self-love, and authenticity. In doing that, kind of opened up this journey of, would I want to be a medium, a channeler? Would I want to do this for a living and charge money and sit with people and do that? I don't know, maybe. Let me see kind of what's out there in the field. And so I started looking for the professional associations, the ethical standards, the scope of practice guidelines. Like, where do I get started? If you were to start a new profession, what do? You start to look, okay, where are the groups, where are the communities? And I was really surprised not to find an overarching nonprofit professional association, ethical standards, scope of guidelines, anything. I thought, gosh, this how is anyone to advance in this field without there being kind of that structure and that support and that guidance? So there's independent practitioners, private practitioners who you can pay to kind of mentor. I thought, well, I don't know. That's just that there's not right an organization. So I reached out to Helene Wabe, who's the director of research at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Said, hey, gosh, there's no ethical standards. Yeah, I'm really curious about this. And she said, yeah, let's do some research around this. So she and I partnered. So we've been partnering in this research for about 2 years now. And we ran a study surveying professional mediums and channelers in the US on their interest in developing ethical standards, developing a neutral nonprofit professional association, looking at scope of practice guidelines. And we actually just presented that work in Oslo, Norway this summer at the International Parapsychological Association.
Oh wow,
Um, yeah, and it's in review for publication right now. And
that's awesome.
yeah, and so we got a lot of great data from that. We ended up having about 150 professional mediums and channelers that took the survey, and their overwhelming response was, yes, we need ethical standards. We need ethical standards in the field to weed out frauds, to, we're ethical people. This is healing, amazing, life-changing work. And the public doesn't get it. The public doesn't know. We need, consumer protection, consumer ethics. We really want to be unified as a field, right? And that's how we grow and legitimize that this stuff is real and it's very healing.
Sure.
So
So you
we
would
ran.
would you only do this work if there was a standard of care?
So I don't know the answer to that. I know that right now, right now I feel very passionate about protecting, again, the sacredness of it. And so I think I'm still kind of going through this internal journey of, is this my path to do it professionally? Or is it my path to support this work for others who are doing it professionally? And I'm still trying to kind of figure that out personally. Um,
Sure.
so right now we do, I'll just throw this last part out there, that we do have a second study open, and it's on the IONS webpage, but it is a consensus building of developing ethical standards for the field. So it's like an iterative process of, developing those standards based on the consensus of practicing mediums and channelers, in the field.
Who would your supervisor be? Who would you, if you could choose out of all the mediums out there to be your supervisor and mentor, who would that be? Marla Freeze? Giving her a little shout out. Thank you, Marla.
Hi, Marla, I love you. I don't know.
I'll tell you what, Suzanne Giesemann has been a powerhouse in the mediumship realm. I love her work too. She'd be interesting. But going back to your story, I mean, your book is essentially a memoir of you're struggling with this. Like you have this academic side of you, you have, and this part of you that is innate, that is wanting to come out and flourish in this world, and like to your point of integrating the two parts together. I mean, your biggest struggle was like your identity and
Yeah.
who am I and
Yeah.
how do I move forward? And then
Yeah.
you also talk about your marriage and how those dynamics play out. I mean, because your husband is a scientist and
Mhm.
also a devout what's his
Orthodox Jew.
religion again?
Yeah.
Orthodox Jew.
Ultra Orthodox, actually.
Really? So how does that play out, right? Like how does that story, like how does that unfold?
It's still unfolding, Trey. It is still unfolding. Every day I'm 46 years old and I feel like an adolescent, like a teenager. I feel like I'm emerging into this sense of identity in a more authentic way than I ever have done in my life. And it feels awkward and messy and uncomfortable and uncertain. And I don't have all of the answers. And I'm just still trying to figure it out.
Sure. Did your husband Michael, did he support you throughout the entire process, or was that just kind of like a rocky road?
He's been very supportive.
Not to put you on,
I,
not to throw you out there under the bus, Michael. I'm sorry, but it just seemed like I just think there'd be a little bit of conflicts, right? Just I
there
mean,
are conflicts. Yes. So
with the
it's
science
both
and
and.
religion. Yeah,
Yeah, Trey, it's both and. He's been very supportive and it has been a core conflict. And in fact, as of today, so the book came out 2 years ago, and as of today, we are separated.
oh wow.
Mhm.
And the other reason why I asked is because he's so much in the book and he's such an important part of your life,
Mhm.
right? Like, and I just, anybody who's listening to this that is struggling with that, right? Like the identity of maybe a hard-nosed scientist or someone who has been very devout in their religiosity of whatever faith they're in, can struggle with that. But hearing your story and how they can relate to that, they could find empowerment in that to move forward and truly be who they're authentically are. I think that's a huge takeaway for me, especially
I,
in this
I
world that we
agree.
live in today.
It's messy, it's awkward, and it's uncomfortable. And I actually recently found this group, the EPRC, which is the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, and they're doing research specifically on emergent phenomenon. And so anytime someone goes through a life-changing event where they become more authentic, right? Maybe they're just going to therapy, maybe they have a coming out experience, maybe they have a spiritual awakening, maybe it's through psychedelics, maybe it's through mediumship channeling. There's so many ways, right? That we have these experiences that break our world open in a way that is so profound, but we can't come back from it. Right. And it shatters our world. And unfortunately, they say, oh gosh, meditation has no side effects. Mindfulness has no side effects. Spiritual awakening has no side effects. It's just all, rainbows and roses and wonderful euphoria. And it impacts careers and relationships and identities. And this stuff is hard. This stuff is really hard. And the struggle that I went through was around that self-acceptance, that self-love, that fear of breaking my world open and breaking my world apart. And there have been consequences, and it has been a rocky road, and I would not change a thing, and I would do it all again. And it took an enormous amount of courage to do that. But for anyone who is on that precipice of, how do I live authentically? Am I ready to live authentically? Is it going to change my life? Yeah, it is. It is going to change your life.
Wow, that's so powerful. I know someone needs to hear that right now, and that's the important part. But going back to the channeling and speaking in tongues or tongue speak, can you connect with ascended masters or other higher guides?
Yes. And that has happened more than once when I've gone into that state where I let the language come through, the tongue speak flows through, there's a channeling and connection where messages are received. And there have been times where other entities have been present, like Mary, Mother Mary, Jesus. Raphael came through one
Wow.
time. There have been others that I wasn't able to identify, but I could feel, and again, it's like, how do you describe it, Trey? It's a feeling, it's a sense of these old, deep, powerful entities and energies. It's like everything is vibrational. And so there's this sense of a kind of a different vibrational frequency, if that,
Sure. What's
yeah.
the highest that you've ever been able to connect to?
Um, I don't know the hierarchy well enough to answer that question.
Me neither.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't know the hierarchy. I don't know that there
Well, let's
really is
say,
one, because
I
I
would
think we're
say,
all
yeah.
one, we're all equal, right? And we're all source. And so there's really no difference between any, entity or being. There's a sense of equality. I do think that there is a hierarchy with regard to responsibility, or I don't know, get this sense that on the other side, there's work and there's networks and there's
Let
responsibility.
me ask you this, right? This has
Yeah.
always confused me. So when people say we are connected, we are source, we are that, right? So how come when people connect over here with and it's just been my curiosity has always gotten the best of me in this area. It's like, so if we're all source and we are of that, then why not just connect with this source? Why connect with
Yeah.
Mother Mary
Yes.
or Jesus or whatever,
Yes.
like the personalities, like, right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. And the more of that you can do, the better. That's great. I think that some people need a connection or a point of connection or a point of entry, right?
Hmm.
So one of the things that I've learned is that, entities on the other side, some are more like skilled, I guess, than others at making that connection within us, within our heart, within our mind, whatever, that we're able to kind of create that bridge, create that, that passageway. If you're able to connect directly with source, go for it. And I feel like that can happen, you know, looking at the beautiful autumn leaves. That can happen feeling the air on your face. It can, and you haven't taken a deep breath. It can happen holding a child or petting an animal, or I mean, there's so many ways that connecting with source can happen in these instances and moments and seconds. And the more of that, the better, of course. And
Wow.
yeah.
How has your channeling influenced, like, has it changed your ideas and concepts about what science is here?
Hmm.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. I think, well, I guess, yes. Okay, let me say this. As I started to research more on this, on the the PSI, right? Psi side of things, the parapsychological side of things, the phenomenological side of things, I realized that a lot of our scientific terms just haven't we haven't caught up with it yet. So, in channeling, mediumship, within the parapsychological field, the biggest gap is that there is not yet a working theory of exactly how this works, right? So there's all this experiential data of that it works, that people have these experiences, these narratives of how it impacts their lives. There's been studies done on like EEGs and brain activity and breathing rhythms and scales of spiritual awakening and well-being. So there's all of these tools of measurement, but there's not a working theory within the field of exactly how, right?
Mhm.
And so we just haven't caught up with it yet. And again, that's for me personally, what I ultimately decided to do was just stop trying to figure it out and just enjoy the experience of it.
Do your guides ever talk about like our genesis, like why we've come here? What exactly? How did we? How did this the human species actually come to be, or anything like that, like evolution, or what have you?
I have not asked that question.
Ah, it's so fascinating to me. Like I've just gotten into that world of just kind of like, I read like an article of what is his name? The guy from who Double Helix Crick. Um,
Mm,
he has an article called panspermia, which is
mm,
essentially the idea or concept that the way that DNA has evolved over time. Like there is an organic compound in our genetic makeup that doesn't really, uh, I guess, coincide with Earth's atmosphere or whatever. Like there's something missing from that. Like if something
mm,
evolved in on Earth, like our genetic makeup should have a plethora of that compound, and
mm.
we don't, right? So
Oh, that's fascinating.
yeah, and he's like thinking that maybe we evolved earlier on a different planet, and somehow, or maybe we are just stardust. I don't know.
I have often felt like, and as a kid and through most of my life, I've often felt like I'm not from here. I don't belong here. I've very often felt that I came from somewhere else.
But when you
Um,
were a kid and you saw those beings or your imaginary friends, did you actually see them, or was that
no,
really
it was all, I'm not a visual. I don't have, when I close my eyes, let the tongue speak come through and the channeling come through, I will have some images. But with my eyes open, I don't have that, the visual experience. No. It's
sure?
more this sense and this knowing, yeah, of
Oh wow.
connectivity. Mhm.
I would love to try some channeling out here now if
Why
you're
not?
open to that.
Yeah, I am. I am. So I will say though, typically, so what I do is I spend a moment or two taking a couple of deep breaths. So there might be a minute of silence or so before we get started. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, okay, okay. So again, what I typically do is I offer a prayer. I take a moment or two of deep breaths just to connect, and then the language flows through. After the language flows through, there's typically a sense of messages, and then we can open up into dialogue. Often they'll say, like, what questions do you have, or what are you looking for? That type of thing.
So
Okay.
when you connect, right, will it be your guide speaking through you to me, or my guide speaking to me?
Either or both. I mean, it'll always be my guides, and
Okay.
we'll invite your guides to participate. I'm sure that they're already here in the room anyway. So,
Let me ask you another question before we go.
yeah, yeah.
How has your physical reality changed since doing this? Have you ever, well, you said you don't visually see it, but has your perspective or perception of physical reality changed since channeling? Have you noticed things more, like have things pop into your reality more so, synchronicities? Like
Yes.
what does that look like?
Oh gosh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I would say more beauty, deeper connectivity, more appreciation. There's more moments where I'm just walking around smiling. I just feel like a sense of contentment, a sense of peace. There's a richness in everything. Sort of like reality is still reality, but there's a deepening, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's mostly it. I think the other thing, just to clarify, is that that's always there, right? But somehow opening up this sense and working with it and developing this trust in this source beyond, um, sort of trust begets trust, right? And so early on, I had a lot of doubt and a lot of anxiety, and I blocked myself, and I had a lot of fear, and I had a lot of interference that I didn't realize I was standing in my own way. I mean, I still do all day, every day, right? But I'm along that continuum of, trying to step back a little bit more and trust a little bit more. And as I trust, those synchronicities are always happening. But as I just trust it and go with it and have this in the moment connection of, oh, got it, thanks. There's this easier communication just all throughout the day, right? Of messages, of nuances, both externally, things that I see, like, repeating numbers on a clock, or somebody saying a phrase, a couple people saying a phrase or a topic in the same day, that type of a thing. But there's also more of a connectivity or a connectedness internally in my own body, right? These feelings of, yes, that's it. That's right. This feeling of warmth or peace, or this very clear, like, no, don't go there. That's not right. Turn around and walk the other way. So those things have just deepened. And I think the more I trust those things, the easier it is to trust them as I move forward along the journey.
Sure.
Be a lifetime journey.
Embrace the journey.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
All right. Any other questions before I?
No, I'm excited.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll just open up the way that I typically do, which is to close my eyes down and say, we open ourselves up. We thank Source Creator for this time that we're here together. We open ourselves up to receive energy and information and communication from the spiritual dimension. And we ask that in so doing, you offer protection and guidance, that we may be protected as we open ourselves up, that we may be guided as we open ourselves up, so that we may receive energy and information only for love and healing and for the highest good of ourselves, those listening, those in our circles and networks. We ask that you help us to remove our egos and anxieties and fears as much as possible, such as that we may not interfere with the process, and such that we may not only receive but perceive the energy and information that's being offered to us today. So thank you. Du lach an bombareti teacha, du dushte veha leended, set ya hande to bevia laka under du baba. Ja, ander kotu to leste en ja puparcheniet ali kutu to stunju to dia. Klach an dide ande de roviad, vishinto to je bevek. Belela ekiti dia ekundu stedet, da yishtu kundu to dale ekje behand utule ark indide da augutet. Bali istin de agitieste steriund, Betty Akandalieste to Stunu no to Lukuch Amberitite Amberut Kill 100 jaar agur abevian nitistist andustrishteviacha. And we say Kaninian de level kokir. Do not underestimate Barry indi de dali tibever your ability to heal kununayedit, your ability to impact kush and your ability to affect kucho and it. We say in the einen de tuko ulayim, go forth, go forth, go forth, ere endi aninu dover. Do not doubt behenu unutole, or stand in the way kunununayetish to the ambavelever, or worry or stress kihin ana analunyerekech about whether in nuna bavin and alikir you are able to kuuvaninayeshetit. Heal. Deliver ununanaishte aikadaliet and ve'in ununabedevechalekitike impact in na ununanayevale in a way that zek an unadevike opens the door shahan ninali for others to experience healing in nina nunabava unukutala within themselves in na ununanashteveda aleakake and ununabevekake then themselves ununarishit go forth and heal. Ken ananali akuk. We say I an alali ukutuch. Now is the time bare and denial to open vinenite, to heal kisis kasala ananayet, and ubivena uboverle and to go forth. Shish andabayevelevekach. That you have been afraid, kishonunone, that you have been worried, kia alaleyachach. It is okay. Forgive. We forgive you. It's fine. It's no problem. And now it is time. Boof and diary. To open your channels. Here, in the center of your palms, to allow healing energy to flow through you and out into the world. And even we are not just speaking of healers, Reiki masters. No, we are speaking of everyday people who can pray, who can offer healing intent, who can, as you say, sit and connect with Source, to remember, to remember where you came from and how you are connected. And simply to be that, to vibrate that out into the world, only that, even that, has an effect. Do not underestimate that just by doing your own meditation, by your own prayer, sitting in, bathing in the light, in the calm and the quiet of your own home, and you go out into the world with that vibration. You do not know all of the lives that you impact just doing that. Just carrying that vibration forth. And then when you add to that prayer, healing intent, holding in the light, those you love, those that you don't. There are real effects, real impacts. Do not underestimate the intensity, the value, the impact that your healing has in this world and on humanity. And now is the time. Now is the time. It is important that you move forward and allow yourself to be a partner in healing this world and impacting humanity. Be that and that that is our message for today. Kush and Tufun on the Okay, I'm back.
Wow. So are you consciously there
Now?
during the channeling?
Yeah, ish. I mean, yes, more or less.
Yeah.
But
If you were to hear that dialect, would you recognize it anywhere else? Like, could you understand it if someone started speaking that? Like,
oh, that's a great question. I have no idea. That's never happened to me before. That would be fascinating.
I've actually had a guest come on the show and speak light language, and it sounded very similar to that to me, right?
Oh, yeah,
And so I would wonder if, like, if you heard it, right,
yeah.
if you would understand it. It's just it's so fascinating to me.
It is a great question. So I've heard that often in the traditional charismatic churches where they speak in tongues, that traditionally there is someone who speaks in tongues and they have that gift. And then there's someone else who interprets, and they have that gift, and that the two need one another in order to, have that partnership of both receiving and communicating the information. For me, what ended up happening was I worked with it to be able to get to that point of interpretation. And it took a couple of long, painful years to do that. So I actually went to a friend of mine who's a therapist. Am I crazy? This is happening to me. What is going on? Which is, again, very common in emergent phenomenon and spiritual awakenings and these, psi experiences. It's very common for people to think they're crazy, and there's this kind of fine line between mental health and spiritual awakening, right? Anyway, I went into her office and said, this is happening. Let the language flow through. And she said, well, what is it saying? Let's work with it. And so I would go in, let the language come out, really, really try and understand it. And it was like taking something larger than life and like condensing it down into like narrow neuronal pathways of the brain for it to come out, in English language, right? It was so hard to do. And I would always finish with a headache and nausea and just totally drained for the rest of the day. And now it just flows, right? But it took a while, because for most of my life, just the language came through and not the interpretation. So the interpretation side is just, more recent in the last 15 years, I guess.
Hmm. So when you interpret that, I guess that part that you were just channeling, that was from your guides, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you channel Mother
Well,
Mary,
mine and yours, mine and yours.
okay. So when
Yeah.
when you channel Mother Mary, it sounds the same, very similar to that.
So yes, and sometimes like the cadence will be different, the pace will be different, the tone might be different. And I've noticed too that even within channeling my guides, sometimes different ones of them speak, sometimes they have a sense of humor and they're laughing and, cutting up jokes. Sometimes they're like so soft and gentle and loving and motherly, and sometimes they're just like really straight up, direct, neutral. This is the information, kind of no emotion around it. So it does change a little bit. Yeah. But the words, the dialect is always the same, but the tone and the energy has nuances.
Well, what about when you conduct a session for a client, or not a client? Sorry, you don't do that yet, but someone you're doing, a friend or a family member, where you're connecting with a past loved one. Does it come through like that language too, or is it
It
them speaking through you?
both, yes. So they when it's yes, so the language is always there. What people have told me is that the longer we're in the session, the more the language dissipates and the more it's just English words coming through. So it's, to me, it kind of seems like it's some kind of vehicle, right? Like it's the thing that takes me there. It's the thing that connects my brain in that some way, or my psyche in some way. And then once I'm locked in there, it's kind of less needed, and it's still there a little bit, but at first it's all the language. And then after maybe like an hour and a half, it's just the messages and just the communications. But there's a lot of kind of intermixing throughout the
Sure.
process. Mm-hmm.
Being in the academic world, have you ever looked at brain scans while you're doing the channeling?
I have not done that yet.
I would be very curious to see what brain states you're in while you're doing that. Like, that'd be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Have they ever given you a clue to why we're here? The big question, the hard question.
Right. So I'm wanting to answer that now based on trying to remember if these are things that came through channeling or thing. I don't feel like I can answer that question accurately,
Sure.
because I have a lot of thoughts and beliefs about that, and certainly my guides have told me before. Um, you know, that we are here. I'll tell you what they've told me. How about that? I'll
Sure.
just tell you
Yeah.
what they've told me. That we are here to learn and to learn and to remember, and that we choose to come here or to stay on the other side. You know, kind of that um, reincarnation versus you know, heaven after earth debate. What I've been told and what I've experienced in connecting with others on the other side is that the souls choose, right? So after you end this life, you connect with your guides, you have your life review, and there's this sense of you still have work to do that you need to finish. Is that work that you can do there? Is that work that you choose to come back here to do? There's a lot of interconnectivity with our family groups and wanting to either stay with them on that side, stay with them on this side, or kind of come back together to be in one another's lives. So I
That's
don't
cool.
know, yeah, why originally we came, but what I've been shown, what I've been told is that this is one of many, you know, quote unquote classrooms, if you want to call it, but this is one of many locations in which consciousness and existence can occur. It's, you know, that Earth is not the only platform or classroom for us to have an experience.
So like different dimensions, multiverse, that kind of thing, right? Like many different classrooms, many different dimensions that we can go or consciousness can go to explore and know itself.
Exactly.
Um, have they ever alluded to the dying process, like what happens while we exit this body?
Hmm.
And the only reason why I keep asking you these questions because I've had a lot of near death experiencers on the show, and like it's so fascinating hearing their process, and then some of the channelers talk to death, right? And I just always wonder, like, if I can just do like a meta analysis with all the channelers and see like what the if there's any commonalities between the death process, right? To kind of
Mhm.
gain some more insight or like what one experiences when going through that.
So I haven't asked that question specifically. I guess what I've gathered is that um, there's not an extraordinary amount of suffering, or there's not suffering. There's sort of this removal of the body. So you know, the consciousness that the spirit is removed and is able to kind of be in this place of peace, right, as the body is going through what it's going through. So, and I think that that process starts before the body actually dies. And that there's, you know, the other thing that I've gathered is that there's a sense of connectivity, kind of an instant connectivity with others on the other side. And again, even before the dying process starts,
Oh.
um, yeah, of being, you know, invited and welcomed. And yeah.
Have you ever seen like different dimensions when you're in meditation? Like when they have they ever spoke to that, right? Like shown you anything?
Oh gosh, I've had so many visuals. I don't know that I could specifically articulate that something is a different dimension. You know, I think sometimes the experience is a lot like how people describe psychedelics, you know, with a lot of images and um, molding and moving of things. So I don't know that I can articulate that well.
Have you ever tried psychedelics?
I have. It's
And
been a long time since I have. But you know, high school and college. You
so
know,
not in like a more present day environment where it's more I get well, I mean it can be clinical, right? Especially what John Hopkins is doing now with PTSD, but it was more recreational back then, I'm assuming.
yeah, yeah. Well, recreational spiritual. Yeah, that was many years ago. But no, right now there's so much research being done on the psychedelic front, and on the consciousness front, and you know, non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I think that for some people, it can provide a gateway for connectivity and kind of help them get out of their way and help them have an experience and kind of remember that they're more than the body, they're more than the mind, they're more than this little you know, box that we put ourselves into of fear and anxiety and worry and overthinking and overstressing. um, and for other people it can cause a psychotic break, or it can cause them to question reality to the point that, you know, is unsafe or uncomfortable. I think there's still a lot of research to be done, but yeah, again, it can be a fine line, right? Between breaking open the psyche, and breaking down and breaking through and breaking apart. And maybe sometimes all those experiences are, intermixed as we go through this journey. But I do work in the behavioral healthcare field. That side of it, the difference between, exploring, and experiencing non-ordinary states of consciousness in order to live a life of well-being, of richness, in a deeper sense of peace and contentment and authenticity. Yes, whatever gets you there. Yes. To seek and search and grasp and grab psychedelics to, have an experience, as a relief from the suffering of the human experience. I get that too. I mean, it's hard to be human. It's really hard to be human. So it's not
Mhm.
always a spiritual experience for people. Sometimes it,
Sure.
recreational.
So do you now have a knowing that there's another reality we just are not conscious to?
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely. Thousand
Yeah.
percent.
Yeah. How do we pierce that veil, right? Like besides using psychedelics, have you figured
Yeah.
that out?
Yeah, well, for me, I feel like it's a gift that I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for. I don't know why I was born this way. I don't know if it's my brain chemistry. I don't know if it's my, life path, all the above, not really sure. Um, but the advice that I would give, or what I think is helpful, is really, really, becoming conscious of the difference between trust and doubt, both in the self primarily, but in, connection with something out there, and to know that the connection can feel really subtle and easy to dismiss. It can be a little, the still small voice of the soul. It can be a whisper. It can be a coincidence that's, easy to, to ignore. And when we ignore it, then we stay shielded, we stay veiled, we stay disconnected, we stay isolated in our own ego reality, which is separated from the oneness of interconnectivity with all other beings both on this earth and beyond, right? And the more we open ourselves up and trust, meditation is a phenomenal tool, prayer is a phenomenal tool. Then, the more we're able to experience those little moments and micro moments of connectivity, and they grow over time. They turn from, seconds to minutes to hours to days, and then in and out of the pain and anxiety of human existence, but they're still there and they grow over time.
100%. In your book, you talk about how we give our power away, right? And I'm
Yeah.
just curious can you hit on more on that? Like, how do we give our power away and how do we become conscious to that we're actually doing that?
Gosh. Um, so how it feels in the body. And gosh, Trey, I have been doing that my whole life and giving my power away to other people that I thought were more worthy or deserving of myself. And it really, for me, stems from this kind of core sense of inadequacy, this core sense of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not, shame and inadequacy is kind of the core struggles that I have in this lifetime. And so giving away my power to work identity, to professional identity, to my husband, to other friends or family members, to anyone else that I think, can create a sense of me feeling okay about myself, right? And how do we know we're doing that? I think we know, at some level we know. But to really answer the question, it's how do I feel in my body? In my body, in my chest, in my gut, in my core, do I feel whole and present in myself? Or do I feel anxious and detached and I'm hanging on this every word, or I'm waiting for this response to this email, or I'm not going to be okay until, all of these external things. So that difference really between, external locus of control and internal locus of control. But when I give away control to other people, situations, money, events, personas, and I'm not present here, then that's kind of a clue, right?
Mm.
When I
Well,
feel a sense of connectivity in my gut and my core and my heart and my soul, that, all is well. I'm present in this moment to enjoy this sunset, to feel this breath, to experience these awkward, uncomfortable emotions that are coursing through my veins, or to feel the joy and euphoria and beauty that is coursing through my veins, and to really be present with that. I'm here, I'm now, here I am, right? I'm present. So how does it feel in the body is kind of what I always come back to.
wow. To be your authentic self, what does that mean? Is that to show up and be selfish and follow your desires, or is it more or less showing up in the world and playing what you think is your part, your role? Like I've always been confused by that, where people have, said to me, "I really like you, Trey, because you're authentic." But I feel like I've hidden my true parts from society and from the public for a very long time. I don't even know if I know how to show up authentically, right? Because there is trauma, there is scars from that. Just it's how we evolve as a society, really, right? Be a part of the group or die. And I feel like you've been very authentic in this conversation and in your writing your book, because you basically let it all hang out and tell your story. But how can someone listening to this right now like show up to be more authentic in their lives?
Excellent question. And you answered a lot of it yourself. Um, Journaling I found to be really helpful, which I think for me was kind of what led into the book. There's this sense, I think it may be somewhere in the Bible and, spiritual teachings, that how does it go? To be in the presence of the other, that we witness one another, right? That we know ourselves often when we are able to share it with someone else. And inside, internally, we all know, right? I mean, we know when we're hiding. We know when we're giving our power away. We know when we're not living our life fully, authentically, who we are and how we feel it. There's this rub, there's this conflict, there's this friction inside somewhere, right? And that's often when we're having to wear that mask, and that mask on the outside is different than the core authentic self on the inside. That friction that it causes has to be soothed somehow. And that's where we find addiction, drug use, alcohol use, or to the point that it's compulsive, to the point that it's addictive, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
But to be in that, yeah, but to be in that authentic self and that sense of peace and wholeness that comes with it is, you know, um, it feels a whole lot better. Okay, so how can we do it? So journaling, I think, can be incredibly helpful. Therapy is incredibly helpful. Saying something authentic to someone else, whether it's someone close or someone that you don't know. Often we say things to strangers that we wouldn't say to somebody that's close to us in our lives, right? Somebody that they don't know. They're not going to, they don't know anybody in my life. They're not going to say anything. Sometimes it's easier to be authentic with strangers, and that's okay. But I think as human beings, we are in this journey together and we need one another. And when we can use one another as a mirror and open ourselves up, even if it's to a stranger, to a therapist, to our journal, that is step number one of just cracking that door of being honest. And I will tell you, the hardest thing about authenticity is courage, right? Having the courage to do it. Trey, I knew for more than 10 years, I was living this life of hiding. I was wearing this mask, and it was eating me up inside. And I knew that I needed to do something different, but I didn't feel strong enough. I didn't feel brave enough. I didn't feel that I had the courage to do it, even though I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I don't know if it was, years of journaling, years of therapy. Writing the book for me forced myself to be authentic, because I was putting it out there, and it was this like, I'm about to say it, so here it goes. But ultimately, what I did is I prayed for courage. because I felt like a coward. I was a coward. I was a hypocrite. I was dishonest to myself. I was wearing a mask to the world, and then, that was so different from who I was. And so I prayed for courage and I prayed for strength. And little by little, in small ways, it came. And then the more that I practiced courage, the more that I practiced speaking and expressing my authenticity, the easier it became, and it kind of snowballed, right? And I just want to validate for, anyone listening, it's a hard journey, it's a long journey, and that's okay. And the human existence is painful, and there's a lot of suffering involved, and it's uncomfortable, and it's awkward, and it's messy, and it's real. And you're not alone, right? I think it's a rite of human passage. Honestly, I think it is every human's journey to find their authentic self and to live it and express it in whatever small or big ways they choose to do or can do. And I think that we all walk around pretending like we got it all together, and then sort of intimidated by others or jealous of others that seem like, they have it more together than we do. And the truth is that we're all a hot mess, and we're
Mhm.
all fragile, and we're all anxious, and we're all unsure. And that's okay.
Sure. Wow. That was such a great answer. What was your first step in being authentic, right, for yourself? Like when, like the example, in your life, where was it just admitting to yourself openly that you were a channeler?
Yeah.
Was it speaking to your husband and saying to him, "This is what I do," or
No,
your family members, or?
it was admitting to myself, right? Because when we wear a mask in the world, it's because we haven't accepted ourselves as we are, who we are. We're lying to ourselves ultimately. It's only about ourselves ultimately, right? We're lying to ourselves. We're fooling ourselves by putting a persona out in the world that's incongruent with who we are. So for me, it really was writing the book. It was forcing myself to tell my story honestly. That journey, and again, this was not like, this is not to sell a lot of books. This is not to be famous by any stretch of the imagination. This was my process, my personal journey of accepting myself. It was my personal journey of loving myself, because I was filled with doubt and shame and criticism and inadequacy. And so by writing it down and then slowly beginning to share my story with others. So when I wrote the book, when it was published, it was a big surprise to a lot of people. Um, and it wasn't about anyone else. It was about me learning to love myself and accept myself, all parts of myself, even the most awkward, uncomfortable, strange, bizarre parts of myself. That's
Mm.
really what it was about, is about accepting it. Yeah, internally.
I'm glad you wrote it. I know that's going to empower a lot of people. Do you think that we choose our life paths before we come into this incarnation?
I do.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So what was your soul's lesson in coming here, and then positioning yourself and your family, right? Like your parents were, I think, very religious.
Mhm.
Your husband had very strict, rigorous rule sets. Like, what was your soul? What do you think? Interpret your soul lesson to be up to this point.
Up to this point, I really think that it is a lot about authenticity and trusting my nature, and coming to terms with my essence, which personally, I'm a deeply spiritual person. I'm somehow hardwired to communicate with the other side. And owning that and accepting that and sitting with that, being with that, figuring out what that means for me in my life and what my contributions are. I'm obviously still right in the middle of that journey. But so far it was a reclaim of my power, because I think starting from a really young age, I gave my power away. And starting from a really young age, I doubted myself. And so far, I think it's really been about love and loving who and what I am and how I was designed. And ultimately, if I have a deep faith in a source beyond comprehension, then why wouldn't that extend to how I'm designed? Right?
Hmm.
I ultimately trust the intricacy and the harmony of the universe or multiverse or whatever it is. Then why wouldn't this design be just as intricate and harmonious and beautiful and acceptable? Right. And so self-acceptance and self-love, and I know empowerment is the right word. I guess we could throw empowerment in there, but it's really more like a returning home, right? Because home is only here in the body, in the present moment, and the now, and the consciousness, and the spirit, and the soul, and the heart. Like this is all that it exists, right? And so returning to that, to me, so far has been what it's been about.
Wow. What type of like what does it feel like, right? When you do that? Like especially when you channel, after you channel and you're back into your body, you come back home and you've been your authentic self. How do you feel?
Amazing, phenomenal, peaceful, content, full, rich, patient, which is saying a lot for me because historically I'm really, really impatient, really. But there's a sense of okayness, like everything's fine, everything's okay, everything is beautiful, everything is unfolding exactly as it's intended to. There's not like an attachment to these things outside that have to happen or need to happen, or I can't wait till they happen, or it just, everything just is.
Hmm.
And it's beautiful.
Do you still have like desires and goals?
God, yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, so let me just preface and say what I just described, that sense of being, Trey. I mean, I might experience that a handful of times throughout the day, but Lord of mercy, I mean, I am just as much human as everybody else, right? In terms of fears and desires and um, still being hypocritical and cowardly and all the things that I'm certainly not arrived by any stretch of the imagination. um yeah,
Yeah, it's the human condition, right?
yeah.
Being more authentic, stepping up and voicing. It's funny how you have this gift of voicing other people. Well, not, I shouldn't say other people, but voicing the messages from the guides, right? And bringing it to people and being a medium. And then when it's, you had to learn how to step up and speak your own voice. You had to find your own voice. You had this amazing gift to connect with a higher level of consciousness and voice that. But as far as your own authentic voice, it took you a long time to step up into that and to grow that and be authentic to that. And I think that's a beautiful journey.
Mhm, mhm. Exactly, you're well said.
Dr. Siri, how can people find you? How can they connect with you?
Siri K Zemel.com.
That's it.
Yeah.
Any socials or anything like that?
I am on LinkedIn, but I have I don't even say love hate. I have a hate relationship with social media. I know it's the way that the world works, but I have a really hard time. Here's Trey. I have not figured out yet how to be fully authentic and engage in social media in a way that's authentic. It just feels so scripted.
Sure.
And yeah, it's a fine line for me. I'm not there yet on socials. Yeah.
Yeah.
I rebel.
What about your I hope it's okay if I ask this question. How do you how do you teach your kids to be authentic, right? Like I have 3 kids. Um and it seems as they get older it's tougher and tougher to speak to them and they actually listen to you. But you being a
They hear
channeler,
you though. They
yeah, they
hear
hear me.
you.
They
Yep.
hear me.
Even when you don't think they do.
Being a channeler, right? Are they open to that? Are they curious to that?
So my older daughter, yes, my younger daughter, no. And I will say, in terms of teaching them to be authentic, can I just say that for most of their life, they got the opposite. I deeply regret, although this is life, we can't have any regret. I fully forgive myself, right? But I'm deeply saddened by the fact that I wasted so much time with them and that they saw a mother who was hiding. They saw a mother who was unhealthy and unhappy. They saw a mother who was not authentic. And Trey, only very recently, I mean, only in these last couple of years have they seen me bloom and blossom authentically into my essence, into my nature. And, you know, we'll see, the jury's out, right? They have many more years to live. So my oldest is 21 and my youngest is just 17 in a couple of weeks. And for the last probably 15 years, what they've seen is bits and pieces of the authentic me, and then a lot of sadness and sorrow and depression and fighting, right? Like with myself, and then just conflict in the marriage and the home. They saw all that. They were witness to all of that. And it's so humbling to know that that's been witnessed, to know that my worst, deepest, darkest parts of myself have been seen, and that that's impacted them in their lives. And so my only hope and prayer now is that as I move forward, they get to see that part of the journey too. And they get to witness that, whatever they're going through in their lives, there's always a way forward, and you can always turn it around. You can always have a next chapter, right? It's not over, until it's over. But in terms of the channeling piece, my oldest daughter loves to connect on that, and we've done several channeling sessions. My youngest daughter practices ultra Orthodox Judaism, and it is not something that she's open to. She thinks it's weird, and I'm weird, and it's so weird, and don't talk about that. So that's where we are today.
Well, I think you're amazing. I loved your book, and I'm excited for your next chapter. Right? I think what you're going to do uh, for others that are listening to this, and by empowering them to be their most authentic self, I think it's going to be great to see. I think for me, you talked a lot about going into the heart space and feeling that, because I neglected that as a man. I mean, even as a boy, I mean, I never really truly felt that for myself. I never really truly knew what love was, and how to love myself, let alone another person, for a very long time. Still learning, but exploring that space more often, and connecting with that, and being open to my own body, and like what's going on, like what is this, the reactions that I have, the uncomfortableness, what is that about, like exploring areas in my body that I'm not normally open to, and instead of just always being in my head and logically thinking of solutions, like just being more in my body and feeling it and getting to know it, and reconnecting with that, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful. Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you
Dr.
for doing this.
Siri, yeah, no, thank you for taking the time, for coming on the show and writing your book. I think, yeah, I just think we have to do this again sometime. And I would really like to hear, as you evolve into this modality, like how your messages change, or how they evolve too. So we have to have you back on to see where you're at in a couple of months or a year or something like that, and see what it looks like.
Sounds good. Thank you for your time, and thank you for doing this show, Trey. Thank you for the work that you're providing to the world.